The dust on Pearl Rollins's skirt told the story of her pride better than any words could. She stood outside the general store in Marysville, Utah, her back straight as a lodgepole pine despite the hollow look in her eyes, and watched the merchant's wife approach with a basket covered in gingham cloth. "Miss Rollins, I have some bread here that went a bit stale for selling, and I thought perhaps you might—" "No, thank you, Mrs. Henderson." Pearl's voice was quiet but firm, her fingers clutching the empty fabric of her pockets. "I appreciate the thought, but I cannot accept it, Mrs. Henderson's face fell, a mix of confusion and concern creasing her plump features. "But dear, there is no shame in accepting help when times are difficult. Since your father passed last month, the whole town has been worried about you." Pearl felt the familiar sting behind her eyes but refused to let the tears fall. Her father, Samuel Rollins, had been a freight wagon driver until the consumption took him, leaving her alone in a boarding house room she could no longer afford and with exactly 43 cents to her name. She was 22 years old and suddenly adrift in a world that seemed determined to view her as an object of pity. "I will manage, Mrs. Henderson. Good day." She turned and walked away before the woman could protest further, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of red Utah dust with each step. It was late September of 1883, and the air carried the first hints of the cold that would soon descend from the mountains surrounding the small mining town. This was not the first offer Pearl had refused. In the 3 weeks since her father's burial, nearly every merchant, miner, and respectable family in Marysville had approached her with some form of charity. Baskets of food, offers of money, suggestions that she might come work as a domestic servant in exchange for room and board. The last option might have been acceptable if not for the way certain men looked at her when they made the offer, their eyes lingering too long on her figure, their smiles too familiar. Pearl had been raised to work for what she earned. Her father had taught her that dignity came from honest labor, not handouts. Even now, with hunger gnawing at her belly and the boarding house owner beginning to make pointed comments about the rent, she could not bring herself to accept charity that felt like pity. She walked past the Silver Creek Saloon, averting her eyes from the painted women who called to miners from the second-floor windows. That path was always available to desperate women, but Pearl would rather starve. She had already inquired at every shop, every stable, every business in town. There was no work for a respectable young woman. The jobs that did exist, cooking, cleaning, laundry, were already filled by women with families or by Chinese workers who would accept lower wages. The sun beat down mercilessly despite the autumn season, and Pearl felt sweat trickle down her back beneath her high-collared dress. The garment had once been a rich burgundy, made by her mother before she died when Pearl was 12. Now it was faded to a dusty rose, patched in places, the hem frayed from dragging through too many muddy streets. But it was clean. Pearl made sure of that, washing it in the creek when she could spare the time and energy. She found herself walking toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland, and the mountain vistas opened up in breathtaking shades of red and gold. A small creek burbled nearby, and Pearl sank down onto a sun-warmed rock, finally allowing herself a moment of despair. What was she going to do? The boarding house owner, Mr. Tibbs, had made it clear that he expected payment by the end of the week or she would be out on the street. She had already sold everything of value her father had owned: his watch, his good boots, his rifle. The money had gone to the doctor bills and the burial. She had nothing left but the clothes on her back and her father's old worn Bible. "You look like you have got the weight of the world on those shoulders." Pearl startled and looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of a mountain lake, deep blue with hints of green. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a worn leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A bandana hung loose around his neck and dust covered his boots. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. "I am fine, thank you," Pearl said automatically, preparing to stand and leave. Did not mean to intrude. The man held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Name is Isaac Zimmerman. I just rode in this morning looking for work." Pearl relaxed slightly. A stranger then, not another well-meaning townsperson coming to offer charity. "Pearl Rollins, and you will find work scarce in Marysvale, Mr. Zimmerman." "That's so." He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow was not. "Seems like a prosperous enough town. Mining still good here." "The mining is fine. But there are more men looking for work than there are jobs available." Pearl stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. "If you are looking for ranch work, you might try the Thornton spread about 10 miles west. They sometimes hire on extra hands." Isaac nodded slowly. "Appreciate the information." He paused, then asked, "And what about you?" "You from Marysvale originally, born here. My father was a freight driver." Pearl was not sure why she was telling this stranger her business, but there was something in his steady gaze that invited confidence. "He passed recently. I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple but sincere. "That must be difficult being alone." Pearl stiffened. "I am managing perfectly well, thank you." A hint of a smile touched Isaac's lips. "I am sure you are. You have that look about you, stubborn independence." Before Pearl could decide if she should be offended, he tipped his hat. "Well, Miss Rollins, I will take your advice about the Thornton place. Perhaps our paths will cross again." He walked away toward where a sorrel gelding was tied near the creek, leaving Pearl staring after him with a strange flutter in her chest that she told herself was just hunger making her light-headed. The next 2 days passed in a blur of increasing desperation. Pearl had managed to earn 15 cents by helping an elderly woman carry groceries home, but the woman had tried to give her $1, and Pearl had refused everything but the small amount she felt was fair payment for the labor. She used 10 cents to buy a small loaf of bread and saved the rest, knowing it would not be nearly enough to satisfy Mr. Tibbs. On the 3rd day, she was sitting on the bench outside the general store, trying to appear as though she was simply resting rather than desperately hoping someone might offer her work, when a familiar figure rode down the main street. Isaac Zimmerman sat atop his sorrel horse, looking trail-worn and weary. He spotted Pearl and guided his mount over to the hitching post nearby, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. "Miss Rollins." He touched his hat brim in greeting. "Mr. Zimmerman, did you find work at the Thornton Ranch?" His expression turned rueful. They had already hired all the hands they need for the season, been trying a few other spreads in the area, but seems like everyone is full up. He glanced at her, taking in details that made Pearl wish she had eaten more recently so the hollows in her cheeks would not be quite so pronounced. "You still managing perfectly well?" Pearl lifted her chin. "Yes, thank you." "Uh-huh." Isaac looped his horse's reins around the post and sat down on the bench beside her, not close enough to be improper, but near enough that Pearl could smell leather and sage and the clean scent of honest sweat. "You know, I have been thinking. I need help, and it seems like maybe you need work." Pearl's heart jumped, but she kept her voice level. "What kind of help?" "Well, I have been saving for a few years now, working ranches from Texas to Montana. Got enough put by to buy some land and start my own spread, something small to begin with. I found a place about 5 miles north of here, 160 acres with good water, some timber, decent grazing. The man who owns it now is heading back east and wants to sell quick. Isaac leaned back against the bench, his long legs stretched out before him. But here is the thing. The land comes with a small cabin, a barn that needs some work, and about 20 head of cattle that are half wild and been running loose for months. I can handle the building and the ranch work, but I cannot be in two places at once. Pearl's pulse quickened. I still do not understand what this has to do with me. Isaac turned to look at her directly. I need someone to help me get that place running. Someone who can cook, help with repairs, maybe learn to handle the business side of things, keeping books, managing supplies. It would be hard work, make no mistake. I would be asking you to earn every penny I pay you. Pay me. Pearl's voice came out almost as a whisper. $20 a month plus room and board. Isaac named a sum that was fair wages for ranch work. The cabin has 2 rooms, so you would have your privacy. I would be sleeping in the barn most nights anyway while I fix it up. This would be a proper job, Miss Rollins, not charity. I genuinely need the help, and from what I have observed, you are not the type to shy away from hard work. Pearl felt tears threatening again, but this time from relief rather than despair. Why me? You do not know me. You could ask in town, find someone with experience. I did ask in town, asked at the saloon last night about available workers. Isaac's jaw tightened slightly. Got some interesting responses. Seems the general opinion is that any decent woman in Marysvale is already employed or married, and the indecent ones would not suit a working ranch. Then someone mentioned you said you were Samuel Rollins's daughter, too proud to accept help from anyone, likely to starve before you would bend that stiff neck of yours. They said that. Pearl felt heat rising in her cheeks. Not in those exact words, but close enough. Also said your father was an honest man, hardworking and reliable. Figured the apple probably did not fall far from the tree. Isaac stood and faced her. Look, I understand if this seems irregular. A young woman working on a ranch for a single man is bound to cause talk. But I give you my word that I will conduct myself as a gentleman. We can draw up a proper contract if you like, make everything legal and above board. And if it does not work out, I will give you 2 weeks' notice and pay to find somewhere else. Pearl looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. She saw only honest fatigue and what appeared to be genuine need. Her practical mind raced through the implications. Yes, there would be gossip. But there was already gossip about her, whispered speculation about how long she could hold out, whether she would end up in the saloon or married to some widower twice her age who needed a mother for his children. At least this was honest work. Real work, with real pay. When would you need me to start? She asked quietly. Isaac's face lit up with a smile that transformed his tired features into something quite handsome. Day after tomorrow. I need to finalize the purchase tomorrow, move some supplies out to the place. If you can be ready the morning after, I will come fetch you with the wagon. I will be ready. Pearl stood and held out her hand. You have yourself a deal, Mr. Zimmerman. His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused and strong. Call me Isaac. If we are going to be working together, might as well dispense with the formalities. Then you should call me Pearl. They shook on it, and for the first time in weeks, Pearl felt something like hope blooming in her chest. The next day and a half passed in a flurry of activity. Pearl paid Mr. Tibbs what she owed him, informed him she would be leaving, and endured his knowing looks and veiled comments about young women who thought they knew better than their elders. She packed her few belongings, 2 dresses, some undergarments, her father's Bible, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day, and a few other small treasures. Mrs. Henderson caught her on the street and tried once more to press food on her, and this time Pearl accepted with grace. I have employment now, she explained, but I would be grateful for provisions to take with me, and I will pay you back once I receive my first wages. The older woman's eyebrows rose. Employment? Where? I will be working for Mr. Isaac Zimmerman, helping him establish his ranch north of town. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, concern, disapproval, and finally resignation. Well, I suppose you know your own mind. Do be careful, dear. A young woman alone with a man, even with the best intentions. We have a proper contract, Pearl said firmly. Everything is legal and respectable. She did not mention that the contract existed mostly in the form of their handshake agreement. But Isaac had promised to put something in writing once they got to the ranch. True to his word, Isaac appeared at the boarding house just after dawn 2 days later, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 draft horses. He helped Pearl load her trunk, a battered old thing that had belonged to her mother, and handed her up onto the seat with a courtesy that went a long way toward calming her nerves. "Ready?" he asked, settling beside her and taking up the reins. Pearl took a deep breath and looked back at Marysvale, the only home she had ever known. Then she looked forward, toward the mountains painted gold by the rising sun. Ready. They rode in comfortable silence for the first mile, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rough road. The morning air was cool and clean, scented with sage and the promise of pine trees as they climbed gradually into the foothills. Pearl watched the landscape roll by, marveling at how different everything looked from this perspective, heading toward something new rather than circling endlessly in the familiar confines of town. "Tell me about the ranch," she said finally. "What exactly needs to be done?" Isaac seemed pleased by the question. "Well, like I mentioned, the cabin is sound but needs some fixing up. Roof leaked last winter, so there is some water damage to repair. The barn is in worse shape, couple of walls need shoring up, new doors, that kind of thing. The cattle have been running half wild, so they will need to be rounded up and properly branded. There is a good creek running through the property. Never dries up even in summer, according to the previous owner. About 40 acres of decent meadow that could be used for hay if we can get it cut before the snow flies. How long before snow? 6 weeks, maybe 8 if we are lucky." Isaac glanced at her. "That is why I need help. Too much for one person to handle alone in that time frame. Come spring, I will need to hire on some seasonal hands for branding and such. But for now, if we can just get the basics done, make the place livable, get the cattle under control, put up enough hay to see them through winter, then we will be in good shape." Pearl nodded, her mind already organizing tasks and priorities. "I can cook and clean, obviously. I also know how to keep books. My father taught me basic accounting. I have never worked with cattle, but I am willing to learn. That is all I ask." Isaac's voice was warm with approval. Willingness to learn goes a long way in ranch work. They crested a rise, and Isaac pulled the horses to a stop. "There she is." Pearl looked down into a small valley cradled between rolling hills. A creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, catching the morning light. Near the creek stood a log cabin, small but solid-looking, with a stone chimney rising from one end. Behind it, a barn leaned slightly to one side, definitely in need of repair, as Isaac had said. Beyond the buildings, cattle dotted the landscape, grazing peacefully in the long grass. It was beautiful, wild and rough, but beautiful. "What do you think?" Isaac asked, and Pearl heard uncertainty in his voice, as though her opinion mattered. "I think it has potential," she said carefully. Then, more honestly, "I think it is lovely." Isaac's shoulders relaxed. "Good. I was hoping you would see what I see in it." They drove down into the valley, and as they approached the cabin, Pearl could see the details more clearly. The structure was perhaps 20 feet by 15, built of solid logs chinked with mud and moss. The door hung slightly crooked, and one window was covered with oiled paper instead of glass. The roof was made of wooden shingles, many of which were missing or damaged. Isaac helped her down from the wagon and led her to the door. "Brace yourself. It is not much right now." He pushed open the door and they stepped into a single large room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and filled with old ash. Against another wall stood a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs. In the far corner, a ladder led up to what must be a sleeping loft. The floor was packed dirt, swept clean but showing signs of water damage near the window. The walls were bare logs, dark with age and smoke. "The previous owner built the addition about 5 years back," Isaac said, pointing to a doorway Pearl had not noticed. "It is small, but it has a real door and a window. I thought you could take that as your room." Pearl walked through the doorway into a space about 8 feet square. It had a plank floor, slightly warped but solid. A small window let in light, and someone had built a simple bed frame into one corner. There was just enough room for her trunk and maybe a chair. "It is perfect," Pearl said, and meant it. After weeks of uncertainty, of not knowing where she would sleep from one day to the next, this small room felt like a palace. Isaac looked relieved. "Good. Let me get your trunk." They spent the rest of the morning unloading supplies from the wagon: flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, and other staples. Isaac had also purchased a few basic tools, some lumber for repairs, and 2 laying hens in a wooden crate. "Figured fresh eggs would be nice," he said, setting the crate down near the barn. "We can build them a proper coop once things settle down." Pearl found herself smiling. "When I woke up this morning, I did not expect I would be tending chickens by afternoon. Ranch life is full of surprises." Isaac grinned back at her, and Pearl felt that strange flutter in her chest again. She pushed it aside, focusing on the work at hand. By midday, they had made the cabin reasonably habitable. Pearl swept out the main room and her small bedroom, clearing away cobwebs and mouse droppings. Isaac repaired the sagging door and replaced the oiled paper on the window with a piece of real glass he had brought from town. They built a fire in the hearth, and Pearl made coffee and a simple meal of beans and salt pork. They ate sitting at the rough table, and Pearl found herself studying Isaac when she thought he was not looking. He had good hands, she noticed, strong and capable, but with long fingers that suggested dexterity. There was a scar along his jawline, faint and old, and his eyes had small crinkles at the corners from squinting into the sun. He was handsome in a rough, practical way, but more than that, he seemed solid, reliable, like a man who said what he meant and followed through. "So where are you from originally?" Pearl asked. "You said you have worked ranches from Texas to Montana." Isaac took a sip of coffee. "Born in Missouri, but my folks died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was 14, had no other family, so I headed west looking for work. Started as a stable hand in Kansas, worked my way up to cowhand, trail driver, ranch foreman. Been saving my wages for years, dreaming of having my own place. That must have been hard, losing your parents so young." "It was. But it taught me to rely on myself, to work hard for what I want." He looked at her with understanding. "I imagine you know something about that." Pearl nodded. "My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just my father and me. He taught me everything he could, how to be strong, how to stand on my own. I think that is why I cannot just accept charity. It feels like I would be dishonoring what he tried to teach me." "There is a difference between charity and community," Isaac said gently. "People wanting to help their neighbors is not necessarily pity." "Maybe. But sometimes it feels like people are more interested in being able to say they helped poor Pearl Rollins than they are in actually seeing me as a person who could help herself if given the chance. Pearl surprised herself with her honesty. She had not spoken so openly to anyone in weeks. Isaac nodded slowly. That is why I offered you work instead of charity. You want to earn your way, same as me. Nothing wrong with that. Thank you, Pearl said quietly, for understanding. They finished their meal, and Isaac pushed back from the table. I am going to start on the barn repairs while the light is good. There is a pump outside for water needs some priming, but it works. Outhouse is behind the cabin, not fancy but functional. Make yourself at home. Organize things however you like. Tomorrow we will start on the real work. Pearl spent the afternoon settling in. She arranged her few belongings in the small room, hanging her 2 dresses on pegs Isaac had driven into the wall. She set her father's Bible on the windowsill where she could see it, along with the photograph of her parents. The room was sparse, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. She ventured outside to explore, finding the pump Isaac had mentioned and working the handle until water gushed out, cold and clear. She filled a bucket and carried it inside, using some to scrub the table and chairs, the rest to begin soaking beans for the next day's meal. Through the window, she could see Isaac working on the barn. He had removed his vest and hat, and his shirt was damp with sweat despite the cooling afternoon air. He moved with purpose, his hammer striking true as he secured new boards to replace rotted ones. Watching him work, Pearl felt a strange warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. She turned away, scolding herself. She was here to work, nothing more. Isaac had given her a chance when no one else would, and she intended to prove herself worthy of his trust. Romance had no place in this arrangement, no matter how handsome he looked swinging that hammer. That night, they ate a simple supper of cornbread and the last of the beans. Isaac had cleaned up at the pump, his hair still damp and curling slightly at his collar. They talked about plans for the coming days, what needed to be done first, what could wait until after the first snow. I am going to sleep in the barn, Isaac said as darkness fell. I set up a bedroll in the loft. The horses are stabled on the ground floor, so it should be warm enough. Are you sure? I could take the barn. You own this place, you should have the cabin. Isaac shook his head firmly. You need your privacy and you need a proper roof over your head. The barn suits me fine. Besides, I meant what I said about conducting myself as a gentleman. This arrangement works better if we maintain proper boundaries. Pearl appreciated his consideration more than she could say. Thank you, Isaac. Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. After he left, Pearl banked the fire and climbed the ladder to the loft to retrieve some blankets she had seen stored there. The space was small but cozy, with a straw mattress built into the wall. It would have made a comfortable bedroom, and she felt a pang of guilt that Isaac was sleeping in the barn instead. But he was right about boundaries. The last thing either of them needed was gossip spreading back to Marysvale about improper behavior. Pearl's reputation was already fragile enough. She settled into her small room, spreading blankets over the bedframe and changing into her nightgown. The cabin creaked and settled around her, unfamiliar sounds that would take time to learn. Outside, a coyote called to its companions, and the wind whispered through the pine trees on the hillside. Pearl lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds, and realized she felt more at peace than she had in months. Yes, there was hard work ahead. Yes, the future was uncertain, but she had a roof over her head, honest employment, and a chance to prove herself. And if her last thought before sleep claimed her was of blue-green eyes and a quiet, steady voice, well, that was her business alone. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Pearl discovered that ranch work was indeed harder than anything she had done before, but also strangely satisfying. She woke before dawn each morning to start the fire and make coffee, preparing a hearty breakfast of eggs from their small flock of chickens, biscuits, and whatever meat or porridge they had on hand. After breakfast, she would tackle whatever tasks Isaac had outlined. Sometimes it was washing and mending clothes, other times cooking meals that could be stretched over several days. But Isaac also taught her other skills: how to milk the cow he had purchased from a neighboring ranch, how to churn butter, how to recognize which wild plants were edible and which were poison. "A ranch wife needs to know these things," he said one afternoon as they gathered wild onions near the creek. Then he froze, his face flushing. "I mean, not that you are. I just meant that anyone living on a ranch should know." Pearl laughed, finding his embarrassment oddly endearing. "I understand what you meant. And you are right, this is all useful knowledge." But the phrase ranch wife lingered in her mind, painting pictures she had no business imagining. As the days shortened and the work continued, Pearl found herself growing stronger. Her hands developed calluses, her arms gained muscle from hauling water and firewood. She learned to handle the chickens without getting pecked, to read the weather by the smell of the wind, to tell time by the position of the sun. Isaac proved to be a patient teacher and a thoughtful employer. He never asked her to do anything beyond her capability, but he also did not coddle her. When she struggled with a task, he would show her a better technique and then let her practice until she mastered it. When she succeeded, his praise was genuine but not excessive. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side on many tasks. Together, they repaired the cabin roof, Pearl holding the ladder while Isaac hammered new shingles into place. Together, they sorted and stacked firewood for the winter, building a woodpile against the cabin wall that would keep them warm through the coldest months. And as they worked, they talked. Pearl learned that Isaac loved horses, that he had once broken his arm being thrown from a particularly ornery Mustang, that his favorite meal was apple pie even though he had not tasted it in years. Isaac learned that Pearl could read and write better than most men, that she had a beautiful singing voice she was shy about using, that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before her father's illness had consumed all their resources. "You still could," Isaac said one evening as they sat on the cabin porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Become a teacher, I mean. Once the ranch is established and profitable, if that is what you want." Pearl considered this. "I think what I want has changed. I used to dream about teaching because it seemed like the only respectable option for a woman on her own. But now—" She gestured at the valley spread before them, the cattle grazing peacefully, the creek sparkling in the fading light. "I think I am starting to understand the appeal of this life." Isaac smiled. "It gets in your blood, ranch work, the freedom of it, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands." "Yes," Pearl agreed softly. "Exactly that." Their eyes met and held, and Pearl felt something shift between them, some barrier beginning to crumble. She saw awareness dawn in Isaac's eyes, followed quickly by uncertainty. He looked away first, standing abruptly. "I should check on the horses," he said, his voice slightly rough after he left. Pearl sat alone on the porch, her heart beating faster than usual. She was not naive. She recognized attraction when she felt it, and she was increasingly certain that Isaac felt it too. But neither of them had acted on it, held back by propriety, and perhaps by fear of complicating their working arrangement. October gave way to November, and the first snow fell on a morning when Pearl woke to find the world transformed into white silence. She stood at her window, marveling at the beauty of it when a knock came at the cabin door. "Pearl, you awake?" Isaac's voice called. Come in." He entered, stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks reddened by the cold. "We need to get those cattle closer to the barn. The snow is coming down heavier in the high country and they will try to drift with it. Can you help me drive them?" "Of course. Let me get my coat." Pearl bundled herself in her warmest clothes and followed Isaac out into the swirling snow. He had already saddled the sorrel gelding, Thunder, and the gentler mare, Willow, that Pearl had been learning to ride. "You take the west side, I will take the east," Isaac instructed. "We just need to push them toward the home meadow where we can keep an eye on them. Do not try to do anything fancy, just keep them moving this direction." It was harder than it sounded. The cattle were stubborn and scattered, reluctant to leave their grazing spots. Pearl rode back and forth, waving her arms and calling out, feeling slightly ridiculous but determined to do her part. The snow fell heavier, reducing visibility until she could barely see Isaac on the far side of the small herd. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, they had the cattle bunched together in the meadow near the barn. Isaac rode over to Pearl, his hat white with accumulated snow. "Good work. You are a natural." Pearl glowed under his praise, hardly feeling the cold. It was exhilarating. "Wait until spring when we have to brand the calves. Then you will really see some excitement." Isaac grinned at her, his eyes bright with shared accomplishment, and Pearl found herself grinning back. They rode to the barn together, and Isaac helped her dismount, his hands steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close, snow falling around them, and Pearl's breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. "Pearl," he said quietly. A loud crack echoed across the valley, and they both jumped. One of the barn doors had broken free of its hinges, swinging wildly in the wind that had picked up with the snow. "Damn," Isaac muttered. "I need to fix that before it tears completely loose." The moment was broken. Isaac released her and strode toward the barn, leaving Pearl standing in the snow, wondering what he had been about to say. The snow continued for 2 days, blanketing the valley in white. Pearl and Isaac worked together to keep the animals fed and watered, to ensure the cabin stayed warm, to pass the enforced closeness without acknowledging the growing tension between them. On the 3rd day, the sun came out, turning the snow to brilliant diamonds. Pearl woke early and made a special breakfast: pancakes with the last of their molasses, eggs, bacon from the pig Isaac had bought from a neighbor. When Isaac came in from the barn, his face lit up. "What is the occasion?" "No occasion. I just felt like making something nice." Pearl set the plate before him, acutely aware of how domestic the scene was, how much it resembled a real marriage rather than an employer-employee arrangement. Isaac dug into the food with obvious appreciation. "This is delicious. You are an amazing cook, Pearl." "My mother taught me before she died. She said a woman who could cook well would never go hungry." Pearl poured coffee for both of them. Of course, she probably did not envision me cooking on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. "Is that what this feels like to you?" "Nowhere," Pearl met his eyes. "No, it feels like somewhere, maybe the first real somewhere I have had since my father died." Isaac set down his fork. "Pearl, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "All right. This arrangement we have, it has been working well, better than I expected, honestly. You have proven yourself 10 times over as a worker and a partner in getting this ranch started." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "But somewhere along the way my feelings changed, started to change, I guess, and I need to know if you might feel the same way." Pearl's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "Isaac, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this complicates things. I know you came here for honest work, not to be courted by your employer, and if you do not feel the same, we will never speak of it again." I will be nothing but professional, and your job is secure regardless. But I had to tell you the truth. I am falling in love with you, Pearl Rollins, and it is getting harder every day to pretend I am not." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Pearl felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "You are not alone in that feeling," she whispered. "I have been trying so hard not to feel anything, to keep everything professional. But I look at you and I see everything I never dared to hope for a good man, an honest man, someone who sees me as an equal and not just as a burden or an object of pity." Isaac stood and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair. "You are the furthest thing from a burden. You are the best thing that has happened to me in longer than I can remember." He took her hand, and Pearl felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Well, I suppose that depends on what you want. We could continue as we are, working together and seeing where things naturally lead. Or," he took a deep breath, "or I could court you properly, take you into town for dinner, go for walks, all the things a man does when he is trying to win a woman's heart." Pearl laughed through her tears. "You already have my heart, you foolish man. You won it the day you offered me work instead of charity. Does that mean?" "It means yes, I would very much like for you to court me properly." Pearl squeezed his hand. "Even though we are living in somewhat improper circumstances." Isaac grinned. "Then maybe we should fix that. Pearl Rollins, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Pearl's breath caught. "Are you serious?" "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." Isaac's eyes were steady, full of love and certainty. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But when something is right, you know it. At least I know it. And I think you might know it too." Pearl thought about the weeks they had spent working side by side, learning each other's rhythms and quirks, building something together from nothing. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how valued, how seen. She thought about the future stretching before them, full of hard work and simple joys and the kind of partnership she had always dreamed of but never expected to find. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Isaac Zimmerman, I will marry you." He stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping her in his arms and holding her close. Pearl rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart, feeling the warmth of his embrace. This was home. Not the cabin, not the ranch, but this man and the life they would build together. They were married 3 weeks later in Marysvale, in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Pearl wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slimmer frame, and carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers. Isaac wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes bright with happiness. The town turned out in surprising numbers, drawn perhaps by curiosity, but staying for the genuine joy of the occasion. Mrs. Henderson wept happy tears and apologized to Pearl for ever doubting her judgment. Even Mr. Tibbs from the boarding house attended, looking slightly ashamed of his earlier harsh words. After the ceremony, several townspeople approached Pearl, shaking her hand and congratulating her. One elderly rancher named Mr. Peterson pulled Isaac aside. "You got yourself a good woman there," he said. "Heard about how she refused every handout in town, insisted on earning her own way. That is the kind of spine you need in a ranch wife." "I know," Isaac said, his eyes finding Pearl across the room where she was talking with some of the other ranchers' wives. "I am the luckiest man alive." They returned to the ranch that evening, riding in the wagon together as husband and wife. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the valley looked like something from a dream. "Are you happy?" Isaac asked as they approached the cabin. Pearl leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "Happier than I ever thought possible." That night, for the first time, Isaac did not sleep in the barn. They shared the loft in the cabin, and Pearl learned another definition of home: the safety of her husband's arms, the tenderness of his touch, the whispered promises they made to each other in the darkness. The first winter as a married couple was hard but wonderful. The snows came heavy and frequent, trapping them in the valley for days at a time. But the cabin was snug and warm, and Pearl found joy in the small domesticities of married life: cooking meals for her husband, mending his clothes, reading aloud from the Bible, or from the few books they owned while he whittled by the fireplace. Isaac continued to teach her about ranch work, and Pearl proved an apt student. By spring, she could ride as well as many of the cowboys who hired on for the branding. She learned to throw a rope, to doctor a sick calf, to read the signs that warned of storms or drought. In April, Pearl realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac one morning over breakfast, watching his face transform from surprise to wonder to pure joy. A baby. He came around the table and gathered her into his arms. "Pearl, that is, we are going to be parents." "Yes," she laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Next November, if I am calculating correctly." Isaac kissed her deeply, then knelt and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mama and I cannot wait to meet you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Pearl continued working through the summer, though Isaac became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and not lift anything heavy. They hired on 2 seasonal hands to help with the summer work, young men from town who were respectful and hardworking. In late summer, they made the trip to Marysvale to purchase supplies and to arrange for the doctor to come to the ranch when Pearl's time came. While they were in town, they ran into the same people who had offered Pearl charity nearly a year before. Mrs. Henderson embraced Pearl warmly. "You look wonderful, dear, absolutely glowing, and I hear the ranch is doing very well." "We had a good year," Pearl said. "The cattle are healthy, we sold several calves for good prices, and we are building on a new room for the baby." "I am so happy for you," Mrs. Henderson said sincerely. "And I want to apologize again for the way some of us treated you last year. We meant well, but we did not really see you, did we? We just saw someone to pity." Pearl squeezed her hand. "You were trying to help in the way you knew how. I understand that now. I was just not ready to accept help on those terms. And now look at you, a successful rancher's wife, about to become a mother. Your father would be so proud." The words brought tears to Pearl's eyes. "I think he would be. I hope he would be." On a cold November night, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Pearl gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy with dark hair and his father's blue-green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Pearl's father. Isaac held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Pearl. Thank you for this gift." Pearl, exhausted but elated, smiled up at her husband. "He is ours, our family." Young Samuel proved to be a calm, happy baby. He slept well, ate well, and seemed content to observe the world from his cradle or from his mother's arms. As winter settled in again, the cabin rang with new sounds: baby coos and gurgles, lullabies sung in Pearl's sweet voice, Isaac's deep laugh as he played with his son. Spring came again, bringing new calves and new life to the ranch. Pearl strapped Samuel to her back in a sling she had made and went about her work, teaching him about the land and animals before he was old enough to understand the words. The ranch prospered. Isaac's hard work and smart management paid off, and they were able to purchase more land, more cattle. They built additions to the cabin: a proper bedroom on the ground floor, a larger kitchen, a sitting room with real glass windows, and a braided rug Pearl made from scraps of fabric. 2 years after Samuel was born, Pearl gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Pearl's mother. She had her mother's delicate features, but her father's stubborn determination, learning to walk at 9 months and getting into everything she could reach. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the ranch expanded, and Pearl and Isaac's love deepened with each passing year. They faced challenges, droughts that threatened the herd, winters that tested their endurance, the occasional bout of illness that frightened them. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Pearl with a gift, a beautiful carved wooden sign for the entrance to their ranch. It read Rollins Zimmerman Ranch, both their names intertwined. "I wanted everyone to know that this place belongs to both of us," he explained. "That we built it together, equal partners." Pearl traced the carved letters with her fingers, her eyes filling with happy tears. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "No," Isaac said, pulling her close. "We are perfect together. That is what matters." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch they had expanded over the years, looking out at the valley that had become their kingdom. The moon was full, casting silver light over the meadows and the creek, illuminating the cattle peacefully grazing. "You ever think about that day I found you sitting by the creek?" Isaac asked. "How different things might have been if I had not stopped to talk to you." Pearl leaned against him, fitting into his side as naturally as breathing. "Sometimes. But I think we were meant to find each other. You gave me what no one else would respect and the chance to prove myself. And in return, I gave you a partner to build your dream with." "You gave me so much more than that," Isaac murmured, kissing the top of her head. "You gave me a home, a family, a reason to work for something beyond just myself. You taught me that being strong does not mean doing everything alone. And you taught me that accepting help from the right person, offered in the right way, is not weakness. It is wisdom." Pearl turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Isaac Zimmerman, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too, Pearl. My stubborn, prideful, amazing wife." They kissed under the moonlight, and Pearl marveled at how far they had come from that day when she had been sitting alone by the creek, desperate and proud and refusing all offers of charity. Isaac had seen past her pride to her strength, had offered her not pity but partnership, not charity but a chance. And she had taken that chance and turned it into a life more beautiful than anything she had imagined. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the cattle and reading his grandfather's old Bible. Rose was pure sunshine, charming everyone she met and developing a special gift with horses. When she was 5, Isaac bought her a gentle pony, and she rode it fearlessly across the ranch, her laughter ringing through the valley. In the spring of 1891, Pearl gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Michael. He arrived early, small and fragile, and for a terrifying week, they were not sure he would survive. Pearl and Isaac took turns holding him, willing him to fight to stay with them. "Come on, little one," Pearl whispered one night, cradling her tiny son against her chest. "You are a Zimmerman. We do not give up. We fight." As if he had heard her, Michael's breathing steadied, his grip on her finger strengthened. He began to gain weight, to grow stronger. By his 1st birthday, he was a robust, active toddler with no sign of his difficult entry into the world. The ranch continued to expand. Isaac hired on permanent hands to help manage the growing herd, building a bunkhouse for them to live in. Pearl managed the household and the books, proving to have a sharp head for business that complemented Isaac's ranching expertise. Together, they made the Rollins Zimmerman Ranch one of the most successful operations in the region, but success did not change them. They remained humble, remembering where they had started. When other families in the area faced hard times, Pearl and Isaac were quick to offer help, not charity, but work. They hired men and women who needed employment, paid fair wages, treated everyone with respect. "We remember what it was like," Pearl told Isaac one night when he had just hired on a young widow to help with the cooking for the ranch hands. "We remember being desperate for a chance." "And we will never forget," Isaac agreed. "Everyone deserves the dignity of earning their own way." In 1893, the nation fell into economic depression. Banks failed, businesses closed, and many ranchers went under, unable to weather the financial storm. The Rollins Zimmerman ranch struggled too, but Pearl and Isaac's careful management and diversified operations saw them through. They tightened their belts, made do with less, and helped their neighbors where they could. One day, a young woman appeared at their door, dusty and travel-worn, asking for work. She reminded Pearl so much of herself all those years ago, proud, desperate, refusing to accept anything she had not earned. "What is your name?" Pearl asked gently. "Catherine Winters, madam. I can cook, clean, handle livestock. I am a hard worker, I promise. I just need a chance." Pearl and Isaac exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them in a look. Then Isaac nodded. "We can use help in the house," Pearl said. "Room and board plus $10 a month to start. If you work out, we will discuss raising your wages." Catherine's face lit up with the same hope Pearl had felt when Isaac offered her work instead of charity. "Thank you, madam. You will not regret this." "I am sure we will not," Pearl said warmly. "Welcome to the Rollins Zimmerman Ranch." Catherine proved to be an excellent worker, and within 6 months, Pearl had promoted her to assistant housekeeper at increased wages. The younger woman became a friend, and Pearl enjoyed mentoring her, teaching her the same lessons Isaac had taught Pearl about self-reliance and dignity. The children continued to grow. Samuel, at 12, was already talking about taking over the ranch someday, learning everything he could from his father. Rose, at 10, announced that she wanted to raise horses, the finest horses in Utah. Michael, at 4, was still too young to know what he wanted, but he followed his older siblings everywhere, determined to keep up despite his shorter legs. On a warm summer evening in 1895, as Pearl and Isaac celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, they sat on their porch and counted their blessings. 3 healthy children, Pearl listed. A successful ranch, good friends, our health. Each other, Isaac added, taking her hand. That is still the greatest blessing. Pearl squeezed his fingers, looking at the man she had married. He had silver threading through his dark hair now, lines deepening around his eyes, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. The years had added character to his face, confidence to his bearing. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking a chance on a stubborn woman who refused every other offer of help?" Isaac turned to her with such love in his eyes that Pearl's breath caught. "Not for a single second. You were the best decision I ever made, Pearl Zimmerman. You and this life we built together." "We still have so much ahead of us," Pearl said. "Samuel will marry someday, give us grandchildren. Rose will breed her horses. Michael will find his path. We will grow old together, watching it all unfold." "I am looking forward to every moment," Isaac said. "Every challenge, every joy, every quiet evening like this one. As long as I have you beside me, I have everything I need." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley they had transformed from raw wilderness into a thriving ranch. The cattle lowed peacefully in the distance. The chickens settled into their coop, and from inside the house came the sounds of their children getting ready for bed, Samuel helping Rose with her reading, Michael singing to himself as he played with his wooden horses. This was what Pearl had dreamed of without knowing she was dreaming it. Not just a home or a family or financial security, but belonging, partnership, love that grew deeper with each passing year, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared labor. She thought back to that desperate woman sitting by the creek, too proud to accept charity, too stubborn to give up. That woman had needed someone to see her not as an object of pity, but as a person of value. Isaac had been that someone, offering work instead of handouts, treating her as an equal from the very beginning. "Thank you," Pearl said softly. Isaac looked at her questioningly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For believing in me. For offering work instead of charity." "Thank you for accepting," Isaac replied. "And for turning a job into a partnership into a marriage, and a marriage into this beautiful life." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the birth of their children. The stars would continue to shine long after they were gone, watching over the ranch they had built and the generations that would follow. Years passed, measured in cattle drives and harvests, in birthdays and Christmases, in the small daily moments that made up a life well lived. Samuel did eventually take over the ranch, marrying a schoolteacher from Marysvale and giving Pearl and Isaac their first grandchildren. Rose started her horse breeding program, developing a line of sturdy, intelligent animals that became sought after throughout the territory. Michael surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university. But he returned to the valley to practice, caring for the animals and people he loved. Catherine Winters married one of the ranch hands, a good man who treated her with respect and love. Pearl stood as matron of honor at her wedding, happy to see another woman find the kind of partnership she herself had found. Pearl and Isaac grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing, but their love never dimming. They would sit on their porch, expanded and improved over the years, but still fundamentally the same, and watch their grandchildren run through the meadows, their laughter echoing across the valley. "We did all right," Isaac said one evening when he was 70 and Pearl 68. "Raised good children, built a legacy that will last." "We did better than all right," Pearl corrected gently. "We did beautifully." She leaned her head on his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, the same gesture they had shared thousands of times over their decades together. It never got old, never lost its power to make Pearl feel safe and cherished. On a spring morning in 1919, Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Pearl holding his hand. He was 74 years old and had lived to see his children grown and successful, his grandchildren thriving, his ranch flourishing. His last words to Pearl were, "Love you, my stubborn girl. Always have, always will." Pearl grieved deeply but not without peace. They had been granted 40 years together, years filled with love and laughter and the satisfaction of work well done. She knew she had been blessed beyond measure. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp-minded and engaged with the running of the ranch until the very end. On her deathbed, with her 3 children gathered around her, she smiled and whispered, "Thank you for everything. Tell your father I am coming home." And in her last moment, she thought she saw Isaac standing in the doorway, young and strong and smiling, his hand outstretched. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Pearl answered and went home. The Rollins Zimmerman ranch continued for generations, always passed down with the story of its founding. Pearl and Isaac became legends in the family, the great-great-grandparents who had started with nothing but determination and built an empire through hard work and love. Their graves stood on a hillside overlooking the valley, side by side, the headstones simple but elegant. Visitors to the ranch would sometimes pause there, reading the inscriptions. Isaac's read, a man who believed in giving chances, not charity. Pearl's read, a woman who proved that dignity matters more than pride. Between the two headstones, their children had placed a third stone smaller with a simple inscription that told their whole story. Together, they built a life. Apart, they were strong. Together, they were unstoppable. And in the valley below, the cattle still grazed, the creek still ran clear and cold, and the ranch still stood as a testament to what two people could accomplish when they met each other as equals, when they offered and accepted help in the right spirit, when they chose partnership over pride and love over fear. The house had been expanded and modernized over the years, but the original cabin still stood, preserved as a museum of sorts for the family. The small room where Pearl had slept that first night remained unchanged, with the pegs on the wall where she had hung her 2 dresses, the window where she had placed her father's Bible. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, people swore they could hear laughter coming from the old cabin, and the sound of 2 voices talking together in the comfortable way of long married couples. Whether it was memory or something more, it was a reminder that some love stories do not end with death. They echo through the generations, inspiring and guiding, proving that true partnership built on respect, forged in hard work, and tempered by genuine love can create something that lasts forever. Pearl had refused charity from every man in town because she knew her own worth, knew that handouts came with strings and expectations. But when Isaac offered work instead, he offered her something far more valuable: the chance to prove herself, to build something with her own hands, to stand as an equal partner in creating a life. And in accepting that offer, in taking that chance, Pearl found not just employment but her destiny. She found home, family, purpose, and a love that sustained her through every challenge and celebrated every triumph. Their story became the foundation of the ranch, the beating heart that kept it alive through depressions and droughts, through wars and changing times. Because Pearl and Isaac had not just built a ranch, they had built a legacy of dignity, respect, and love that would endure as long as the mountains stood watch over their valley. And so the story ends where it began, in a small valley in Utah, where a proud woman and a wise man met at exactly the right moment, where work was offered instead of charity, where partnership bloomed into love, and where 2 people proved that the best foundations are built not on what is given freely, but on what is earned together, side by side, with respect and love lighting the way. The end.